Welcome everyone. Today we are going to learn the story of Islam from the very beginning. This video is educational, and it is meant to help us understand history, culture, and one of the most influential religions in the world. Islam today is followed by more than 1 billion people, but every great story has a beginning. Islam did not appear suddenly. It began in a specific place, during a specific time in history, in a land filled with tribes, traditions, and many different beliefs. In this video series, we will explore how Islam began, how it grew, and how it spread across the world. We will talk about the people, the struggles, the events, and the powerful moments that shaped this history. And as you listen to this story in simple English, you will also improve your English listening and understanding. This video is for educational purposes only. It explains the historical story of Islam in a respectful and informative way. We respect all religions and beliefs, so take a deep breath, relax, and let's travel back in time, more than 1,400 years ago. Chapter 1. The World Before Islam. Arabia before the message. To understand Islam, we must first understand what the world looked like before Islam began. Our story starts in the Arabian Peninsula, a large desert region located between Asia, Africa, and Europe. Today, this region includes countries like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. But more than 1,400 years ago, Arabia looked very different. Most of the land was dry desert. There were very few rivers, and the climate was harsh. Because of this, many people lived a nomadic life. They moved from place to place with their camels and animals, searching for water and food. These people were organized into tribes. A tribe was like a large family group. Loyalty to the tribe was extremely important. People protected their tribe and supported each other. But tribes often had conflicts and wars with other tribes. Sometimes these wars lasted many years, even for small reasons. In this society, honor and loyalty were everything. In the middle of this desert region was an important city called Mecca. Mecca was not powerful because of farming or armies. Instead, it was powerful because of trade and religion. Many trade routes passed through Mecca. Merchants traveling between Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean often stopped there. Because of this, Mecca became a busy trading city where goods, ideas, and cultures met. But Mecca was also important for another reason. In the center of the city stood a very old and sacred building called the Kaaba. The Kaaba was a cube-shaped structure that people believed had been built long ago by Prophet Ibrahim, and his son Ismail. Originally, according to tradition, the Kaaba was meant to be a place to worship one God. But over time, the beliefs of many people in Arabia changed. Instead of worshiping one God, many tribes began to worship many idols and statues. These idols were placed inside and around the Kaaba. Some tribes believed the idols represented gods of nature. Others believed they represented spiritual powers. At one time, there were said to be more than 300 idols around the Kaaba. Because of this, tribes from across Arabia would travel to Mecca for religious pilgrimages. They came to honor their idols and participate in religious rituals. This made Mecca both a religious center and a business center. The tribe that controlled Mecca was called the Quraysh tribe. They were powerful and respected across Arabia. Life in Arabia during this time had both strengths and serious problems. On one hand, the people valued hospitality, bravery, poetry and loyalty. If a traveler came to someone's tent, they were often welcomed and protected. But on the other hand, many serious social problems existed. There were strong tribal divisions. People were often judged only by their tribe, not by their character. The rich and powerful sometimes treated the poor unfairly. Slavery existed, and many slaves had very difficult lives. Women also had limited rights in many tribes. In some places, daughters were not valued as much as sons. Some historical sources even mention that in extreme cases, newborn daughters were buried alive because families feared poverty or shame. The society was full of traditions, but also injustice. Religious beliefs in Arabia were very mixed. Most people practiced polytheism, meaning they believed in many gods. Some worshipped idols made from stone, wood, or metal. Others believed in spirits and supernatural forces. But there were also small groups of people who believed in one God. Some Jewish and Christian communities lived in nearby regions. There were also individuals known as Hanifs who rejected idol worship and believed in the one God of Abraham. So even before Islam appeared, the idea of one God already existed in some places. But it was not the dominant belief in most of Arabia. Many historians describe this period as a time when Arabia was searching for guidance. The region had strong traditions and cultures, but it also faced many moral and social challenges. The world was changing. Empires like the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire controlled large parts of the surrounding regions. Trade routes connected different civilizations. Ideas were spreading. And in the middle of this desert land, in the city of Mecca, a child would soon be born who would change the course of history. This child would grow up to become Prophet Muhammad, and his message would eventually reach millions and then billions of people across the world. But that story begins with his birth. Chapter 2. The birth and early life of Prophet Muhammad. And in this very city, around the year 570 CE, an important event happened. A child was born who would later become one of the most influential figures in human history. His name was Muhammad. According to historical tradition, the year Muhammad was born was remembered as the Year of the Elephant. In that year, a powerful ruler from Yemen named Abraha marched toward Mecca with a large army. His goal was to destroy the Kaaba so that people would stop visiting Mecca and instead come to his own religious center in Yemen. Abraha's army even brought elephants, which was something very unusual for the people of Arabia to see. But before they could reach the Kaaba, something unexpected happened. Historical accounts say that large groups of birds appeared in the sky and dropped stones on the army, forcing them to retreat. The army was defeated before it could destroy the Kaaba. Because of this dramatic event, the year became known as the Year of the Elephant. And it was during this same year that Muhammad was born. Muhammad was born into the Quraysh tribe, the powerful tribe that controlled Mecca and the Kaaba. His family belonged to a respected clan within the tribe called Banu Hashim. Although his family had an honorable reputation, they were not very wealthy. His father's name was Abdullah. His mother's name was Amina. But something very sad happened even before Muhammad was born. His father Abdullah died while Amina was still pregnant. This meant that Muhammad entered the world already an orphan from his father's side. This early hardship would shape his life in many ways. In those days, It was common for babies born in Mecca to spend their early years with Bedouin families in the desert. The desert environment was believed to be healthier and also helped children learn strong language and survival skills. So when Muhammad was still a baby, he was taken to live with a Bedouin woman named Halima. Halima and her family cared for him in the desert for several years. According to traditional stories, Halima later said that after Muhammad came into her home, her family began experiencing unexpected blessings. Their animals became healthier and their lives improved. Whether people see these stories as miracles or simply tradition, they became an important part of the early narrative of Muhammad's life. After spending several years with Halima, Muhammad eventually returned to Mecca to live with his mother. Muhammad's time with his mother did not last very long. When he was about 6 years old, his mother Amina passed away while they were traveling. This meant that Muhammad had now lost both of his parents at a very young age. He was truly an orphan. After his mother's death, Muhammad was taken in by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib was a respected leader in Mecca and cared deeply for his grandson. But sadly, this comfort also did not last long. Only about 2 years later, his grandfather also passed away. Now Muhammad was only 8 years old, and he had already lost his father, mother, and grandfather. After the death of his grandfather, Muhammad was placed under the care of his uncle, Abu Talib. Abu Talib was a kind and respected man, but he was not wealthy. He worked hard to support his family. Muhammad grew up in this household and learned the value of hard work, patience, and responsibility. As a young boy, he helped his uncle by taking care of sheep and animals. This may sound like a simple job, but in those days it taught important skills. A shepherd needed patience, observation, and calm thinking. These qualities would later become important parts of Muhammad's character. As Muhammad grew older, people in Mecca began to notice something special about him. He was known for being honest, trustworthy, and respectful. In a society where business and trade were extremely important, trust meant everything. Merchants needed someone reliable to carry goods and manage trade deals. Because of his strong character, people started calling Muhammad Al-Amin. This name means the trustworthy or the honest one. Even people who later disagreed with his message still respected his honesty. When Muhammad was still young, he sometimes traveled with trade caravans. These journeys took him to places like Syria and other trading cities. During these travels, he saw different cultures, religions, and ways of life. He met people who followed Christianity and Judaism, and he saw how large civilizations were organized. These experiences helped him understand the wider world beyond Mecca. They also helped shape his thinking about society, justice, and faith. When Muhammad was about 25 years old, an important event happened that would change his life. A respected and wealthy businesswoman in Mecca named Khadijah was looking for someone trustworthy to manage her trading business. Many people recommended Muhammad because of his honesty. So Muhammad began working for Khadijah, managing her trade caravans. He handled her business with great integrity and success. Khadijah was deeply impressed by his character. Eventually, she proposed marriage to him. Even though Khadijah was older than Muhammad, their marriage became one of the most respected and loving partnerships in Mecca. They supported each other with trust, respect, and loyalty. Khadijah would later become the first person to believe in Muhammad's message when Islam began. Together they had several children, and Muhammad lived a stable and peaceful family life. Even though Muhammad lived a normal life as a husband, father, and merchant, he often spent time thinking deeply about the world around him. He saw many problems in society: tribal conflicts, injustice toward the poor, idol worship around the Kaaba, social inequality. These things troubled him. So sometimes he would leave the busy city of Mecca and go to a quiet place outside the city. There was a mountain near Mecca called Jabal al-Nur, which means the mountain of light. Inside that mountain was a small cave called Hira. Muhammad would go to this cave to reflect, pray, and think about life and truth. He would spend long hours there in silence. And it was in this very cave that something extraordinary would soon happen, an event that would change not only Muhammad's life, but the history of the entire world. Chapter 3. The first revelation and the beginning of Islam. He was not looking for fame, power, or leadership. He was simply searching for understanding. He saw the suffering of the poor, the unfair treatment of many people, and the confusion of worshiping many idols. So he often left the busy streets of Mecca and climbed the mountain to sit alone in the cave. There, in silence, he would pray, think, and reflect. He did this many times over several years. But one night, something happened that would change the course of history forever. Muhammad was around 40 years old. One night, while he was alone inside the cave of Hira, an unexpected and powerful experience took place. According to Islamic tradition, an angel appeared. The angel was Jibril, known in English as Gabriel. This was not something Muhammad expected or understood at first. The angel commanded him to read or recite. Muhammad replied that he did not know how to read. The command came again, and again Muhammad answered that he could not read. Then the angel delivered the first words of what would later become part of the Quran. These words spoke about creation and knowledge. They told people to read in the name of the one who created human beings. This moment is known as the first revelation. It marks the beginning of the message that would later be called Islam. After this powerful experience, Muhammad felt frightened and confused. He quickly left the cave and returned to his home in Mecca. His heart was racing, and he was unsure what had just happened. When he reached home, he asked his wife, Khadijah, to cover him with a blanket because he was shaking. He told her everything he had experienced. Instead of doubting him, Khadijah comforted him. She reminded him of the kind of person he was. She told him that he was honest, generous, and always helped the poor and those in need. Because of his good character, she believed that something meaningful had happened to him. Khadijah became the first person to believe in Muhammad and support him. Her support would become extremely important in the early days of Islam. Khadijah later took Muhammad to meet her relative Waraqah, who was known as a learned man familiar with earlier religious traditions. After hearing Muhammad describe the experience in the cave, Waraqah said that the being who appeared to him was the same angel who had appeared to earlier prophets. He told Muhammad that he had been chosen to deliver a message, but he also warned him that the path ahead would not be easy. He explained that many prophets before him had faced opposition and rejection from their own people. Muhammad now began to understand that his life was about to change. The message that Muhammad began to share was simple but powerful. At its center was one idea: there is only one God. In Arabic, the word for God is Allah. The message taught that people should stop worshiping idols and instead worship the one creator of the universe. It also taught many moral values. Help the poor. Be honest in business. Treat others fairly. Care for orphans. Avoid injustice and cruelty. These ideas were powerful because they challenged many of the existing practices in Mecca. At the beginning, Muhammad did not publicly announce the message to everyone. Instead, he shared it quietly with people he trusted. The first people to accept the message were very close to him. The earliest believers included Khadijah, his wife Ali, his young cousin who lived in his household Abu Bakr, a respected merchant and close friend Zayd, who was part of his household. These early believers formed the first small group of Muslims. The word Islam means submission to the will of God, and a person who follows Islam is called a Muslim. At first, the group was very small. They prayed together and learned the message slowly. After some time, Muhammad was instructed to begin sharing the message more openly. So he began speaking to people in Mecca about the idea of one God and about living a moral and just life. Some people listened with curiosity. Some accepted the message, but many others reacted with anger and fear. Why? Because the message challenged the traditions that had existed in Mecca for generations. The leaders of the Quraysh tribe were especially concerned. Their power and influence were connected to the idol worship around the Kaaba. If people stopped worshiping idols, the leaders feared that their authority and business would weaken. So many of them began opposing Muhammad's message. At first, the opposition was mostly mockery and criticism. Some people laughed at the idea of abandoning their traditional idols. Others accused Muhammad of inventing stories or trying to gain power. But as more people began accepting the message, the opposition slowly became stronger and more serious. The early Muslims were still a small and vulnerable group. They had no army, no political power, and very little protection. Many of them were poor or socially weak members of society. Because of this, they were often the first to face mistreatment and pressure. Despite these challenges, the small community continued to grow slowly. The message of Islam was spreading quietly, but the tensions in Mecca were increasing. And soon the situation would become much more difficult for the early Muslims. Their faith would be tested through persecution, hardship, and sacrifice. Chapter 4: Persecution, Patience, and the Migration to Medina. As the message of Islam slowly spread in Mecca, the number of believers began to grow. At first the group was small, but the ideas of one God, justice, and equality attracted people from different backgrounds. Some believers were merchants, some were young people, and many were poor or enslaved individuals who felt hope in the message that all humans were equal before God. But the leaders of Mecca, especially the powerful Quraysh tribe, were becoming more worried. They believed Muhammad's message threatened their traditions, their authority, and the economic importance of idol worship around the Kaaba. Because of this fear, the opposition to Islam became much stronger. At first, the leaders tried to stop Muhammad by arguing with him and insulting him. They called him names and accused him of spreading strange ideas. But when this did not stop the message from spreading, some of them began using pressure and punishment. The early Muslims who had strong tribal protection were somewhat safer. But those who were poor, enslaved, or without powerful families faced much harsher treatment. One well-known example is Bilal, who was an enslaved man. When his master discovered that he had accepted Islam, he punished him severely. Bilal was dragged into the hot desert and forced to lie on burning sand with heavy stones placed on his chest. Despite this pain, he continued repeating the words, "One God, one God." Eventually, a close companion of Muhammad named Abu Bakr bought Bilal's freedom and rescued him from slavery. Stories like this showed the strength of belief among the early Muslims. The leaders of Mecca also tried to pressure Muhammad directly. They offered him wealth, leadership, and power if he would simply stop preaching his message. But Muhammad refused. He explained that his mission was not about money or status. His mission was to deliver the message he had received. Because he refused to compromise, the opposition against him continued to grow. As the persecution became more serious, Muhammad advised some of his followers to leave Mecca temporarily to find safety. A group of Muslims traveled across the sea to the land of Abyssinia, which is part of modern-day Ethiopia. The ruler there, known as the Negus, was known for being a fair and just leader. When the Muslims explained their situation, the Negus allowed them to stay and live peacefully. This was the first migration of Muslims in history. The leaders of the Quraysh then decided on another strategy. They organized a social and economic boycott against Muhammad's clan, the Banu Hashim, who were protecting him. The boycott meant that people were forbidden from trading with them, marrying into their families, socializing with them. For nearly 3 years, Muhammad and his supporters lived in very difficult conditions. Food became scarce. Families struggled to survive. But they remained patient and did not give up their beliefs. Eventually, some people in Mecca began to feel that the boycott was unfair. The agreement was broken, and the boycott ended. Soon after the boycott ended, 2 deeply painful events happened in Muhammad's life. First, his beloved wife Khadijah passed away. She had always supported him, comforted him, and believed in his message from the very beginning. Shortly after her death, his uncle Abu Talib also passed away. Even though Abu Talib did not accept Islam, he had always protected Muhammad from the enemies in Mecca. Without Khadijah's emotional support and Abu Talib's protection, Muhammad felt a deep sense of loss. This difficult period became known as the Year of Sadness. Hoping to find new supporters for his message, Muhammad traveled to a nearby city called Taif. He spoke to the leaders there about Islam and invited them to listen. But instead of accepting his message, many people in Taif rejected him harshly. Some people mocked him, and others even threw stones at him as he tried to leave the city. It was one of the most painful moments of his life. Yet despite the rejection and injuries, Muhammad remained patient and continued his mission. Around this time, something important began to happen. Some visitors from a city called Yathrib met Muhammad during their travels to Mecca. Yathrib was located north of Mecca and was a city with several tribes that often had conflicts with each other. When these visitors heard Muhammad's message about peace, justice, and unity, they were deeply interested. They invited him to come to their city and help bring peace among their tribes. Over time, more people from Yathrib accepted Islam and promised to support Muhammad. Eventually, Muhammad instructed his followers in Mecca to quietly move to Yathrib. One by one, small groups of Muslims left their homes and traveled north. Finally, Muhammad himself prepared to leave. But the leaders of Mecca had discovered the plan. They decided to stop him by surrounding his house at night. However, Muhammad and his close companion Abu Bakr managed to leave safely. They hid for several days in a cave outside the city before continuing their journey. After traveling across the desert, they finally arrived in Yathrib. The people welcomed them warmly. Soon after, the city became known as Medina, which means the city of the Prophet. This migration, known as the Hijra, was one of the most important events in Islamic history. It marked the moment when the Muslim community moved from being a small, persecuted group to forming a new society. Because of its importance, the Hijra later became the starting point of the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad would begin building a community based on faith, cooperation, and justice. Chapter 5: Building a New Community and the Growth of Islam. The people of Medina who welcomed them were called the Ansar, meaning the helpers. One of the first important steps Muhammad took was to create strong bonds between these two groups. He paired many migrants with helpers so they could support each other like family. This created unity and cooperation in the new society. For the first time, the Muslim community was living together in a place where they could practice their faith freely. Soon after arriving in Medina, one of the first things Muhammad did was build a mosque. A mosque is a place where Muslims gather to pray, learn, and meet as a community. The mosque in Medina was very simple. It was built with palm tree trunks, mud walls, and a roof made of palm branches. But even though it was simple, it became the heart of the community. People gathered there not only to pray, but also to discuss problems, make decisions, and learn about their faith. This mosque became one of the most important places in early Islamic history. Medina was home to different groups of people. There were Muslims, but there were also Jewish tribes and other communities living there. Muhammad worked to create a system where all groups could live together peacefully. A document known as the Constitution of Medina was created. This agreement established rules for cooperation and protection among the different tribes and communities of the city. It explained that everyone in Medina should work together to maintain peace, justice, and security. This was one of the earliest examples of a written agreement creating a multi-community society. Even though the Muslims had found safety in Medina, the leaders of Mecca were still angry. They saw the growing Muslim community as a threat. Many Muslims had left their homes and property behind in Mecca, and tensions between the two sides continued to grow. Eventually, these tensions led to several conflicts and battles. These events were difficult and shaped the early history of the Muslim community. One of the first major conflicts was the Battle of Badr. The Muslim group was much smaller compared to the forces from Mecca. But despite being outnumbered, the Muslims managed to win the battle. For the early Muslim community, this victory became a moment of hope and confidence. It strengthened their belief that patience and determination could help them overcome great challenges. However, not every event ended in victory. There were other battles and difficult moments that tested the strength of the community. One such event was the Battle of Uhud, where the Muslims faced serious challenges and losses. These moments taught the community important lessons about discipline, unity, and perseverance. Despite these difficulties, the Muslim community continued to grow. More people in Arabia were becoming curious about the message of Islam. Years later, Muhammad and many Muslims decided to travel toward Mecca to perform a peaceful pilgrimage. However, the leaders of Mecca stopped them before they could enter the city. After negotiations, both sides agreed to a peace agreement called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. At first, some Muslims felt the treaty seemed unfair, but over time it proved to be very important. Because there was now peace between the two sides, people could travel and communicate more freely. As a result, many more people learned about Islam and accepted it. Sometimes peace can achieve more than conflict. A few years later, the peace agreement was broken by one of the allied tribes. Because of this, Muhammad and a large group of followers moved toward Mecca. But instead of seeking revenge, the approach was calm and controlled. When they entered Mecca, many people expected punishment or conflict. Instead, Muhammad declared general forgiveness for most people. He removed the idols from around the Kaaba and restored it as a place dedicated to the worship of one God. This moment was known as the peaceful conquest of Mecca. It became one of the most important turning points in the history of Islam. After the events in Mecca, many tribes across Arabia began accepting Islam. Some were inspired by the message of unity and justice. Others respected the growing strength and stability of the Muslim community. Slowly, the message that had started with a small group of believers was spreading across the Arabian Peninsula. The society that had once been divided by tribal conflicts was now beginning to move toward shared faith and cooperation. Chapter 6. The final years of Prophet Muhammad and the legacy of Islam. The small group that once struggled quietly in Mecca had now become a large and organized community. But the story of Islam was not only about growth and expansion. It was also about the final years of the Prophet who had carried this message through years of difficulty, patience, and determination. About 10 years after the migration to Medina, Prophet Muhammad performed what would become known as his final pilgrimage to Mecca. Thousands of Muslims from different parts of Arabia traveled to Mecca to join him. For many people, this was the first time they saw such a large gathering of believers united by one faith. During this pilgrimage, Muhammad gave an important speech that later became known as the Farewell Sermon. This speech summarized many of the principles that Islam taught. In this message, he reminded people about important values such as treating others with justice, respecting the rights of women, protecting the weak and the poor, avoiding exploitation and unfair treatment, understanding that all humans are equal regardless of tribe or background. He reminded people that no race or tribe is superior to another, and that what truly matters is good character and righteousness. For many historians and scholars, this message became one of the most important teachings in Islamic history. After completing the pilgrimage, Muhammad returned to the city of Medina, where he had built the Muslim community over many years. By this time, Islam had spread across much of Arabia. Tribes that had once fought each other for generations were now beginning to live under a shared set of principles. But soon after returning to Medina, Muhammad began to feel seriously ill. At first, the illness seemed like a fever, but over time it became clear that his condition was worsening. Despite his illness, he continued guiding the community and reminding people to remain united. In the year 632 CE, Prophet Muhammad passed away in Medina at the age of about 63 years old. For the Muslim community, this was an incredibly emotional moment. Many people were shocked and deeply saddened. Some even found it difficult to believe that the man who had guided them for so many years was gone. But one of his close companions, Abu Bakr, reminded the people of an important truth. He said that Muhammad was a messenger, but the message of Islam was about God, who does not die. These words helped the community regain their strength and continue forward. After Muhammad's passing, the Muslim community needed leadership to guide them. The companions of the Prophet chose Abu Bakr as the first leader after him. This position later became known as the Caliph, meaning a successor who helps lead the community. Under the leadership of Abu Bakr and the leaders who followed him, the Muslim community continued to grow. The message of Islam began spreading beyond Arabia into nearby regions. Within the following decades, Islam spread into parts of the Middle East, North Africa, Persia, Central Asia. This spread happened through trade, communication, and the movement of people. As Islamic civilization developed, many centers of learning were established. Scholars began studying subjects such as mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, literature. Cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba later became important centers of knowledge. During these centuries, scholars working in Islamic civilizations contributed many discoveries and preserved important knowledge from earlier cultures. One of the central elements of Islam is the Quran, which Muslims believe contains the message revealed to Prophet Muhammad. The Quran became the foundation of Islamic teachings and guidance. Islam also includes important practices that help shape the daily life of believers. These include acts of worship, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. These practices help Muslims remember values such as discipline, gratitude, compassion, and responsibility toward others. Today, Islam is one of the largest religions in the world. It is followed by more than 1 billion people across many different countries and cultures. Muslims live in regions across Asia, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, the Americas. Even though cultures and languages are different, many Muslims share common beliefs and traditions that connect them. The meaning of the story. The story of Islam is not only about events in history, it is also a story about faith, patience, struggle, and change. It began with one man reflecting quietly in a cave. It continued through years of challenges and growth. And over time, it developed into a civilization that influenced large parts of the world. For many people, the history of Islam is not only a story of the past, but also a source of spiritual guidance and cultural identity today. And that brings us to the end of this incredible story. From the silent deserts of Arabia, from a small cave on a quiet mountain, a message began that would eventually reach every corner of the world. What started with one man reflecting alone in the cave of Hira slowly grew into a community, then into a civilization, and eventually into one of the largest religions in human history. The story of Islam is not just about historical events or dates. It is a story about faith, patience, struggle, and transformation. It shows how a powerful idea can change societies, inspire people, and shape the course of history for centuries. More than 1,400 years ago, a small group of believers faced hardship, rejection, and many challenges. They lost their homes, they faced persecution, and many times their future seemed uncertain. But through patience, determination, and belief, they continued moving forward. Over time, their message spread across deserts, cities, and continents. It influenced cultures, languages, traditions, and communities across the world. Today, millions of people continue to follow the teachings that began during those early moments in the history of Arabia. Understanding this story helps us understand not only Islam itself, but also the history of many parts of our world. It helps us see how ideas, beliefs, and leadership can influence generations. History is not just about the past. It is also about understanding the present. When we learn about the journeys of people and civilizations, we begin to see how the world we live in today was shaped. And that is why stories like this matter. They remind us that every major movement in history began with a beginning. Sometimes it began with a single idea, a single voice, or a single moment that slowly grew into something much bigger than anyone could imagine. I hope this story helped you understand the history of Islam in a clear and simple way. And at the same time, I hope listening to this story in simple English also helped you improve your English and learn something new. Thank you for spending this time with me and traveling through this long journey of history. If you enjoyed this story and want to continue learning more powerful stories, world history, and educational content while improving your English, make sure to subscribe and join us again, because there are many more fascinating stories waiting to be explored. And I look forward to sharing them with you in the next video.